Part 1. The coffee that started everything. Every morning at exactly 7:15, my daughter-in-law placed a cup of coffee on the small table beside my chair. At first, I thought it was kindness. "Good morning, Dad," she would say with a bright smile. "Fresh coffee." I'd nod and thank her. After my wife passed away 2 years ago, the house had become quiet and lonely. My son insisted I move in with him so I wouldn't be alone. And for a while, it seemed like the right decision. But then something strange started happening. Every morning, about 20 minutes after drinking that coffee, I felt dizzy. Not just tired or lightheaded. It felt like the room tilted slightly, like the floor moved under my feet. At first, I blamed age. I was 71 after all. But the feeling kept getting worse. One morning, I nearly collapsed while walking to the kitchen. My daughter-in-law rushed over and grabbed my arm. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. "I just feel dizzy," I muttered. She waved it off almost immediately. "That's normal at your age. Blood pressure changes. It happens to my father, too." My son nodded from the dining table without even looking up from his phone. "Yeah, Dad, you worry too much." So I tried to believe them. But deep down, something didn't feel right, because the dizziness only happened after the coffee. Every single time. One afternoon, my neighbor Carl stopped by. Carl used to be a paramedic before retiring. He had seen just about everything. When I mentioned the dizziness, he frowned. "What time does it start?" he asked. "Usually after breakfast." "And what do you have for breakfast?" "Just coffee," I said. Carl went quiet. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Next time, don't drink it right away." The next morning, when my daughter-in-law brought the coffee, I smiled and thanked her like always. But when she left the room, I quietly poured the coffee into a small thermos. Later that afternoon, Carl drove me to a small private laboratory he knew. "Just run a test," he told the technician. I didn't think much would come of it. Maybe too much caffeine. Maybe some strange supplement. But 2 days later, the lab called. And the words they said made my hand shake so badly I had to sit down. Because the technician told me something that made only one thing clear. I needed to call my lawyer immediately. If this story already has you wondering what the lab discovered, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Because what the test revealed about that coffee was far more dangerous than I ever imagined. Part 2. What the lab found. I stared at the phone for a long time after the lab technician finished speaking. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. "Can you repeat that?" I asked slowly. The technician's voice became more serious. "Sir, the sample you brought in contains traces of a sedative compound. In small amounts, it can cause dizziness, confusion, and weakness. But with repeated doses, it can become dangerous." My heart started pounding. "A sedative?" I whispered. "Yes," he replied. "And based on the concentration, it looks like it was added intentionally." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Because suddenly every morning over the past 2 months made sense. the dizziness, the weakness, the strange fog in my mind. Someone had been drugging me, and the only person who prepared that coffee every morning was my daughter-in-law. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence. Carl, my neighbor, noticed my expression. "What did they say?" he asked. I slowly handed him the lab report. He read it carefully. Then he looked up at me with a face that was much more serious than before. "Frank, this isn't an accident." My chest tightened. "Why would she do this?" I asked. Carl didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked another question. "Who inherits your house?" The question hit me like a punch. "My son," I said. "And after him?" "His wife, I guess." Carl leaned back in his chair. "Frank, if someone wanted to make you look sick, confused, or unstable, this would be one way to do it." Suddenly, something came rushing back to my memory. 2 weeks earlier, my daughter-in-law had mentioned something strange at dinner. She said casually, "Maybe it's time we talk to a doctor about your memory. Dad, you've been forgetting things." At the time, my son had agreed immediately. "We just want to make sure you're safe," he said. Safe. Now I understood what they were doing. If they could convince a doctor that I was losing my mind, they could get control of my finances, maybe even my house. Carl looked at me again. "You need to be careful now," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "If she's already drugging you, confronting her directly could be dangerous." My hands clenched into fists. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend nothing is happening." Carl shook his head. "No, you're going to do something smarter." He pointed to the lab report. "You're going to document everything, so that evening, when my daughter-in-law walked into the living room carrying the usual morning coffee," I smiled politely. "Thank you," I said. But this time, I didn't drink a single drop. Instead, I placed the cup quietly on the table, and while she wasn't looking, I turned on the small camera Carl had helped me hide in the room, because now I needed proof. And what I captured the very next morning was something I never expected to hear. Part 3 will reveal the moment the hidden camera recorded something that changed everything. Part 3, the hidden camera. The next morning, everything looked normal. My daughter-in-law walked into the living room carrying the usual white mug. Steam rose from the coffee just like every other day. "Good morning, Dad," she said sweetly. "I made your favorite." I forced a small smile. "Thank you." But this time, the tiny camera hidden on the bookshelf was recording everything. Carl had helped me set it up the night before. It was small enough that no one would notice it unless they knew exactly where to look. My heart was pounding as she placed the coffee beside my chair. "Drink it while it's hot," she said. Then she walked back toward the kitchen. I waited a few seconds before quietly picking up the mug and pouring the coffee into the sink. Just like the day before, I replaced it with plain coffee I had made myself earlier. Then I sat down and pretended to drink it. About 20 minutes later, my daughter-in-law returned to the room. "So," she asked casually, "how are you feeling today?" I shrugged. "Better than yesterday." For a moment, Something strange flickered across her face. Disappointment. But it disappeared almost immediately. "That's good," she said quickly. "Maybe the medicine is finally helping." Medicine. The word echoed in my head because I hadn't taken any medicine. That night, after everyone went to bed, Carl came over. We sat at the kitchen table and watched the camera footage together. At first, nothing unusual happened, just the usual routine. But then something strange appeared on the video. After I went upstairs that morning, my daughter-in-law came back into the living room. She picked up the coffee mug, looked inside, and frowned. "That's strange," she muttered. Then she pulled out her phone. Carl and I leaned closer to the screen because the next words she said made my stomach twist. "Yeah, he drank it again," she whispered. "But the dizziness isn't getting worse yet." Carl paused the video. We looked at each other in silence. "She's talking to someone," he said. I nodded slowly. The video resumed. On the phone, my daughter-in-law continued speaking. "I've been putting it in his coffee every morning like you said." My hands clenched. "Every morning." Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. "Once the doctor signs the competency papers, the house will finally be ours." The room went silent. Carl stopped the video. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he looked at me. "Well, now we know the plan." My voice came out quieter than I expected. "They're trying to declare me mentally unfit." Carl nodded. "And once that happens, they control everything. My house, my savings, everything my wife and I had worked our entire lives to build." But the most shocking part wasn't even that. It was the fact that my own son had to know about this, because this wasn't something she could do alone. Carl leaned forward. "You have proof now," he said. "Yes, but if we move too early, they'll deny everything." He paused. "What we need is something bigger." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" Carl smiled slightly. "We let them continue their plan." My eyebrows lifted. "And when they think they've won," he tapped the table, "that's when we expose everything." I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt calm. Because they thought I was weak. They thought I was confused. They thought I had no idea what was happening. But they were about to learn something very important. I wasn't the one being trapped. They were. And 3 days later, they made the biggest mistake of all. Part 4 will reveal the shocking moment my daughter-in-law brought a doctor into the house to declare me mentally unfit, not knowing everything was being recorded. Part 4. The doctor arrives. 3 days passed. During those 3 days, I pretended everything was normal. Every morning, my daughter-in-law brought the coffee. Every morning, I thanked her. And every morning, I quietly poured it down the sink when she wasn't looking. The camera kept recording. Carl and I watched every piece of footage at night. But the real moment came on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Then voices at the front door. My daughter-in-law walked in first. Behind her, was a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase, and behind him was my son. My stomach tightened immediately, because I already knew what this was. "Dad," my son said with an awkward smile, "we brought someone to talk to you." The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Harris, a doctor." Exactly like the plan my daughter-in-law had mentioned on the phone. I shook his hand slowly. "What kind of doctor?" I asked. "Geriatric evaluation," he said politely. "Your family's concerned about your health and mental clarity." I almost laughed. Concerned. But instead, I nodded and played along. "Well, I suppose that's reasonable." My daughter-in-law crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, watching closely, almost like she was waiting for something. The doctor sat down across from me. "I'm just going to ask you a few questions," he said. "Simple things at first. My age, the year, the name of the president." I answered every question easily, but the doctor kept going. "What day of the week is it?" "Thursday." "What month?" "April." "What is this address?" I gave the exact address without hesitation. The doctor nodded slowly. My daughter-in-law's smile was starting to fade. Then the doctor asked something interesting. "Do you ever feel confused or dizzy during the day?" I looked directly at my daughter-in-law. "Yes," I said calmly. Her face lit up instantly. But I continued speaking. "Only after drinking the coffee my daughter-in-law gives me every morning." The room went silent. My son looked confused. "What are you talking about, Dad?" I leaned back in my chair. "I mean the coffee that contains a sedative compound." My daughter-in-law's face turned pale. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly. "You're imagining things." I calmly reached into the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the lab report. Then I placed it on the table. The doctor picked it up and started reading. My son leaned closer. "What is this?" he asked. Carl stepped into the room at that moment. He had been waiting in the kitchen, and he held something in his hand. A tablet. "Maybe this will help explain it," Carl said. He tapped the screen, and suddenly the living room filled with the sound of my daughter-in-law's voice from the recording. "I've been putting it in his coffee every morning." My son froze. My daughter-in-law looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under her. The video continued playing. "Once the doctor signs the competency papers, the house will finally be ours." My son slowly turned toward his wife. "What is this?" She tried to speak, but no words came out. And that was the moment everything changed, because the doctor quietly closed the folder and looked directly at her. "I think this evaluation is finished, but the real shock was what happened next." Part 5 will reveal the moment my son finally realized what his wife had been doing behind his back. Part 5. The moment my son understood. The video ended. For several seconds, no one moved. The room felt heavy, like all the air had suddenly disappeared. My son was staring at the tablet in Carl's hands, his face completely pale. Then, slowly, he turned toward his wife. "Emily," Tell me that's not you." She opened her mouth. For a moment, it looked like she was trying to find the right lie, but nothing came out. "That video is manipulated," she finally said weakly. Carl almost laughed. "Manipulated? We have the lab results, the pills, and 3 days of recordings." The doctor placed the lab report on the table. "These sedatives should never be given to someone his age without medical supervision." My son looked back at Emily again. "You've been giving him this every morning?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I was just trying to help him sleep better." But my son's voice was different now. Cold. "You said on the recording that once the doctor declared him incompetent, the house would be ours." Emily's eyes darted around the room. My lawyer stepped forward calmly. "That recording has already been copied and secured." Emily turned toward me. "Dad, please." "I can explain." I looked at her quietly. "You already did." Carl pressed play again. Her voice filled the room once more. "I've been putting it in his coffee every morning." Emily started crying. "It wasn't supposed to go like this." My son slammed his hand on the table. "What were you thinking?" She looked at him desperately. "You said the house was worth over $2 million. The room went silent again. My son's expression changed. Slowly, he stepped backward. "You did this? For money?" Emily shook her head, still crying. "I thought it would take months. I didn't think he'd notice." My stomach tightened, because hearing those words out loud hurt more than anything else. The doctor closed his briefcase. "I'm going to report this situation." My lawyer nodded. "And we'll be contacting the authorities." Emily looked around in panic. No, you can't do this." But the truth was already out. The lies, the plan, the poisoning, all of it. And as she stood there crying in the middle of the living room, I realized something. The daughter-in-law who had smiled every morning with a cup of coffee had just destroyed her own life. But the story wasn't finished yet, because what happened later that evening was something none of us expected. Part 6. The police arrive. Emily was still crying when the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a warning. My lawyer walked to the door and opened it. 2 police officers stepped inside. The moment Emily saw their uniforms, her face completely drained of color. "No," she whispered. One of the officers spoke calmly. "We received a report regarding possible poisoning." The doctor handed them the lab report. Carl gave them the tablet containing the recordings. And my lawyer quietly explained the situation. The officers listened carefully while flipping through the evidence. Then one of them looked directly at Emily. "Ma'am, have you been giving this medication to Mr. Harrison without medical approval?" Emily wiped her tears. "It was just vitamins," she said weakly. The officer raised the lab report. "These results say otherwise." My son stood frozen beside the table, staring at the floor. The officer then pressed play on the recording again. Emily's voice filled the room. "I've been putting it in his coffee every morning." The officer paused the video. "Do you deny saying this?" Emily didn't answer, because there was no answer left. After a moment, the officer sighed. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Emily's eyes widened. "You're arresting me?" "Right now you're being detained for questioning." She turned toward my son in desperation. "Say something." But he didn't move. His voice came out quietly. "You tried to poison my father." That sentence broke whatever hope she still had. Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The officers gently helped her stand. As they walked her toward the door, she looked back at me. "Dad, please." But I didn't respond, because the woman standing there wasn't the daughter-in-law who had once joined our family. She was someone else entirely. And sometimes the hardest truth in life is realizing that the person you trusted was only pretending all along. The door closed behind the officers. The house became silent again. My son sat down slowly and buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he said quietly. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You didn't know, but deep down, we both understood something now. The nightmare was finally over. Or at least, we thought it was, because the next morning, my lawyer called with news that shocked all of us. There was someone else involved in the plan, and that discovery was about to change everything. Part 7. The person behind it all. The next morning, I was sitting in the kitchen when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. His voice sounded more serious than usual. "Frank, there's something you need to hear." I felt a strange tension in my chest. "What happened?" "Emily is talking to the police." That didn't surprise me. But the next thing he said did. And she says she didn't come up with the plan alone. For a moment, I didn't say anything. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. "There was someone else pushing her to do it." My mind started racing. "Who?" There was a short pause on the line. Then he answered. "Her brother." I leaned back in my chair slowly. Emily's brother, Daniel. He had always made me uneasy. He rarely visited the house, but whenever he did, he always seemed overly interested in the property. "How much land is this?" he once asked. "What would something like this sell for?" At the time, I thought he was just curious. Now I understood why. My lawyer continued speaking. According to Emily, Daniel convinced her that if you became mentally incompetent, control of the house would legally pass to your son, and eventually to her. "And Daniel?" I asked. "He planned to help sell the property afterward." My hands tightened around the phone. "For how much?" The estimate we found in his messages was around $2.5 million. I closed my eyes for a moment. 40 years of memories in that house. My wife planting the garden. My son learning to ride his bicycle in the driveway. And someone had seen it as nothing more than money. Later that afternoon, my son came to see me. He looked exhausted. "I talked to the police," he said quietly. I nodded. "They told me about Daniel." He sat down across from me. I can't believe I didn't see what was happening. I looked at him carefully. Sometimes people only show their true intentions when they think no one is watching. He rubbed his forehead. "They're investigating Daniel now." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up again. What are you going to do now? I stared out the window toward the backyard, the same yard where my wife and I had spent so many summers. I'm going to protect what your mother and I built, I said quietly. And after that, I paused. I'm going to make sure no one can ever try something like this again, because there was still one final step left. One decision that would make sure this house, and everything connected to it, would never become a target again. And when my lawyer heard the plan I had in mind, even he was surprised. Part 8 will reveal the final decision I made about the house and why it shocked my entire family. Part 8. The decision that changed everything, final part. A week after everything happened, the house felt very different. No whispered phone calls. No cups of coffee waiting on the table. Just silence. For the first time in months, I woke up without dizziness. But the quiet also gave me time to think. About the house. About my family. And about what had almost happened. That afternoon, my lawyer came over. We sat in the same living room where everything had fallen apart days earlier. I've prepared the documents you requested, he said. My son, Mark, sat beside me looking confused. What documents? He asked. I slid the folder across the table. He opened it slowly. Then his eyes widened. You're donating the house? I nodded. Yes. The document clearly stated that the property would be transferred to a community trust for senior housing after my lifetime. The house wouldn't belong to my son or to anyone else in the family. It would belong to a program that helped elderly people who had nowhere else to go. My son stared at the papers. Dad, why would you do this? I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. 40 years of memories lived in these walls. But I had also learned something painful. A house can bring people together, or it can bring out the worst in them. I'm still going to live here, I told him calmly. But when I'm gone, it will help people who actually need it. My son sat quietly for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. I understand. My lawyer smiled faintly. It's a strong decision. I signed the papers. Just like that, the house was protected. No schemes. No inheritance battles. No one waiting for me to collapse. Later that evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. The air was calm. The world felt peaceful again. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I finally felt safe in my own home. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. It's making sure the people who tried to use you never get the chance again.